The Guardian, Book 1 of the Gods and Kings Chronicles, by Lee H. Haywood. Available now in both print and ebook formats. Visit leehhaywood.com for more details.
Chapter 3. The Avo Few. Smoldering stalks were all that remained of the grassland. Mounds of charred bodies were heaped where the haggard men had piled atop one another in their flight from the field. A shrill horn had sounded from beyond the forest wall almost immediately after the dragons arrived. The rotting men froze in place, swords stalled mid-swing, thrusting spears jerked to a sudden stop. A second burst from the horn sent the remaining foes shuffling from the field in retreat. Most of the enemy didn't make it to the tree line, their bodies too ravaged by the flaming breath of the dragons. A handful had wandered into the woods with their upper torsos wreathed in flames. Rancor could see that the forest had caught fire in a few places, kindled by the walking torches. Even now, a few men still crawled across the field, their legs burned to useless black stumps. The two dragons stood their ground, their great barreled chests heaving with exhaustion. Their serpent eyes flickered over the throng of weary elves, finally settling upon Rancor. The white dragon lowered her head out of respect, touching her chin to the ground. "High Lord Rancor, I wish we could have met under better circumstances." She awkwardly fumbled with the words, as one unaccustomed to speaking in the common tongue. "As do I," said Rancor, finally finding his voice. He bowed, recognizing he was before the matriarch of one of the great dragon broods. "Although in truth we have met before, only then I was young, a child beside my father's throne. But I remember you, Dane Balak. It is an honor to meet you again." "The honor is mine," said Balak. The leathery folds of her wing membranes rustled against one another, creating a sound not so unlike a cicada's call. She gestured to her companion. "This is Dai-Horon." "It's an honor," said Rancor, bowing once more. The dragon made no effort to return the gesture, but instead regarded him with cold serpent eyes. My gratitude is truly unceasing," stammered Rancor, unnerved by the dragon's demeanor. "But I have trouble believing this was a chance encounter." "One of my clan spied the horde yesterday near the Capernican border," explained Balak. "There are things we will not allow. Necromancy is a banned practice. We had been following them for much of the morning." "You know what these are?" pressed Rancor, motioning to one of the enemy. A man lies supine, his legs hacked off at the knees. He groped blindly in the air, mindlessly champing his teeth. "Vapapiant, epikaji," said Balak, spitting out the words in the ancient tongue as if they were venom. "Carrion whites. But from where they originated we do not know." "Capernicus," said Rancor, "have to be certain of something. Only magics can do this." "Likely, but do not direct guilt blindly against King Johann," said Horon, speaking now for the first time. His voice was low, drawing from his throat like the hiss of a serpent. Once ignited, the fires of war are not easily quenched. "Until I find evidence to the contrary, there is nowhere else that blame may lie," said Rancor in exasperation. He walked away from the corpse in disgust. All matters must be dictated by the authority of the crown. If Johann's men acted without his approval, he is still responsible for their actions. Rancor stamped his foot into the ground, trying to feign strength. "I want the head of the man who did this, and by the gods, if I find that King Johann ordered this attack, he will soon discover that his grasp is fingerless in these woods." "Indeed," snarled Horon, causing the scales upon his neck to bristle. "Amass your armies, stoke the flames of war, respond to the provocation with force. The outcome will certainly prove satisfactory for all parties." Horon began to walk away, flapping his wings slowly. "No, this is not our fight. Let the Cretans have their war, Balak. We have done our duty here today." Balak ignored Horon's scorn. "I'm not asking you to capitulate. I'm asking you to wait. I made a promise long ago that I would act as an intermediary if it were possible. Gather your swords, for you are lord amongst your people, and it is not my place to interfere. But give me a few days. I've already ordered a messenger to the Nexus to meet with King Johann. You may soon find that he would gladly give you the head of the renegade who committed this treacherous crime." Rancor nodded, although it pained him to do so. He wanted blood. His men needed blood. Hesitancy to act was more likely to be perceived as cowardice than wisdom. "I will not halt my hand if these blighted creatures cross the Marlon." "I would expect nothing else," said Balak. Now, if you will, let me have a hand at your injured. They buried the dead beneath the boughs of the tree. Those that could be saved were tended to by the dragoness. Balec's healing gifts were wondrous, and she breathed new life into men who Rancor feared were bound for death. The injured were laid upon a makeshift stretcher. The undead carcasses were thrown into the Marlon River. Rancor was certain the floating corpses would send the appropriate message to his enemies downstream. The wary army trudged east, every man eager to be out of the contested borderlands as quickly as possible. Horon and Balak transformed their figures. One moment they stood stalwart upon the prairie. The next they melted into a swirl of mist, only to reappear in the humble guise of elves. The transformation was not quite perfect, and there was a foreignness about their Cretan masks that Rancor found unsettling. The skin of their faces was smooth and featureless, lacking pockmarks or creases. Their hair was silver, and their eyes black as coal. They concealed their bodies in cream-colored cloaks that appeared to be made of liquid. The cloth shifted and rippled with each step. Rancor could read nothing from their expressionless faces, and he couldn't help but feel a disquieting shiver whenever he stared into their fathomless eyes. Balak drilled him about the happenings of the day, trying to learn what Rancor knew of the carrion horde and its origins. Rancor did his best to accurately tell all that had befallen his men, but in truth he understood it no better than the dragons. Horon commented rarely, choosing to mull the information in silence. As evening neared, Rancor's guard approached the village of Palmyra, a sizable settlement that flanked the eastern bank of the Marlon. A shoddily crafted wooden bridge overreached the river. Beyond lay the village, wreathed by a low berm that ran its perimeter. The crest of the berm was reinforced with a wooden palisade. Looming behind the meager fortification stood dozens of white stucco buildings with red clay roofs. Word of the army's approach had preceded them, and citizens crowded the bridge mouth, eager to welcome Rancor and his victorious men. As soon as he came into view, a mob of awestruck children flocked around him, whooping and swinging wooden swords. Rancor patted the children on their head. He smiled inwardly at their innocence. They know nothing of war and death. For a moment the image of the deserting soldier flashed within his mind. In truth, the man had not been much older than these children. He blinked away the troubling vision. A portly man dressed in a fine silk surcoat and breeches came ambling through the crowd, using his great girth to plow people aside. This was the mayor, and he insisted that he be the first person to formally meet the High Lord. The mayor fell to one knee. "Our village is indebted to you, High Lord." He took Rancor's hand within his own and pressed his lips to Rancor's knuckles. "Word of the carrion scourge ran a terror through my people, but the arrival of your soldiers has eased many fears." "It is my duty and honor to protect these people, Mayor Uriel," replied Rancor in a diplomatic tone. He motioned for the mayor to stand, uncomfortable that any man would show him such unbridled devotion. "It is always a pleasure to serve my people," continued Rancor. "Now, if I may introduce you to my two companions." Greetings were exchanged. Upon hearing he was in the presence of dragons, Mayor Uriel doffed his cap and bowed so low his stomach almost touched the ground. "We will rest here for the night," explained Rancor to the mayor. "My men are in need of provisions and lodgings." The mayor clapped his hands, delighted by the opportunity to play host. "This will be done, but what more, we will have a dinner in your honor." He began to bark out orders to his attendants, calling for music, food, wine, and competition. Every imaginable element of revelry was listed. A victory deserves celebration. A life well lost deserves due ceremony. My high lord, we will do honor by your men. I will see to it personally. By dusk, numerous tents were raised, and dozens of trestle tables were packed to the brim with food and drink. They were placed in the clearing just outside the palisade. The sun fell beneath the horizon, and a massive bonfire was set aflame, illuminating the whole gathering in dancing light. Balak's quick dragon eyes took in the gathering in a matter of seconds. 1,000 elven souls, each one a point of light against the backdrop of evening. They jubilantly celebrated the defeat of the carrion menace, ignorantly unaware that the threat still loomed. Beneath the canopy of the largest pavilion, the mayor toasted Lord Rancor and his brave men, loudly showering accolades, real and imagined, on the High Lord. He hoisted a chalice full of wine over his head to open the festivities. Nearby, a troop of minstrels began to pluck at their harps while singing of the fall of Iramor. The party began in earnest. Youths began to dance in a circle, their feet churning the soil with their fervent steps. A young soldier and maiden dashed off into the forest hand in hand, whispering and laughing as they went. Men took turns leaping over the bonfire, while others go to their friends to go next. The only people who seemed at all displeased were a collection of Vachian acolytes who sat on the outskirts of the gathering, clucking in disapproval at all they saw. It is good they can still revel in something, thought Balak. Let them have their bliss a while longer. Her stomach burned with belching flame. The world was not right. She had sensed it for some time now, a storm on the periphery of her vision, slowly girding them in. The shadow's reach was expanding, and when the storm finally broke, she shuddered at the thought. Men like Rancor would not be able to stem the tide. Too affable, too soft. She cited Rancor, finding that he played the part of Lord well. His face was handsome, albeit rather slim. His hazel eyes were piercing, and stood in stark contrast to the brown eyes possessed by most everyone else. His dirty blonde hair was knotted, and set through with an ivory pin. He still wore the scale leggings he had worn in battle, but he had cast aside his cuirass, revealing a purple tunic clasped by moonstone buttons. Still, there was nothing patronizing about his manner. He gladly set his noble decorum aside and hobnobbed with the mayor and the town elders, slapping men on the back and celebrating with them drink for drink. Her ears honed in on the odd guttural screech of Cretan tongue. Lord Nokman swung with all his might, hewing the hand of the Black Knight. A village elder was perched atop a stump, recounting a tale from the War of Sundering, in animated detail. A collection of cross-legged children leaned forward with mouths agape, eager to hear every word. The elder pinwheeled his arms over his head as if engaged in a duel. All within the confines of Brothwell fell hushed in awe, but the all-powerful Dark Lord had great strength and magic, and he lashed out with searing lightning, disarming Lord Nokman of his razor wind. The children cheered in delight and yelped in horror at the ebb and flow of the tale. Balak smiled warmly. The balance was so fragile. Just a while longer, she prayed. Let the peace persevere a while longer. Grant one more generation a chance. The creators mocked her devotion with silence, as they always did. She caught up with Horon as he began to walk away from the gathering. Horon carried with him 2 plates stacked to the brim with food. Sugared leeks, roasted meat, cheesecakes, and a number of other finely prepared dishes. A roasted leg of chicken was lodged firmly in his jaw. It is shocking to think that we have become legends in our own lifetime, said Balak. She shook her head, awed by the passage of time. What could you possibly be referring to? Muttered Horon around a mouthful of meat. You and I, we had a part in that tale, said Balak, as she plucked a bloated berry from her mate's plate and popped it in her mouth. The mixture of tart and sweet sat on her tongue. She closed her eyes, enraptured, and dropped down to the earth, feeling the chill from the dew-laden ground seeping through her bones. It was moments like this that made life worth living. The demigods are dead, for now the people are free. Am I not entitled to stop and enjoy the fruits of my labor? Horon settled down beside her, huffing with disagreement. We ought to be preparing. They ought to be preparing. Balak pressed her brow into his forehead. His skin was like smoldering coals. The blissful flicker of fire and ice danced through her frame. She found this sensation oddly satisfying. So much was numbed by the hard bony plates that adorned her true body. He pulled away, his stiff Cretan face twisted into a smirk. Don't attempt to beguile me with your Cretan wiles. You are not like them, he whispered. Why do you despise the Cretans so? Asked Balak quietly, making sure her voice could not be heard by others. We were not the only ones who fought for them, growled Horon. His temperament momentarily cut through his disguise, and his eyes glowed as blue as flame. There are many that we loved who are no longer here because of that cursed war. You cannot resent them for that, chided Balak. It was the worm that led to those losses, not man, not elf. Do not forget that we each made the choice to fight. That's what I regret, that choice, said Horon resolutely. For in that choice we risked all, and by the end many gave all. It was a waste. The Cretans have shown through their actions they do not deserve our sacrifice. How can you say such things? Was today not proof enough? All of the death, all of the destruction? And what did they learn from it? Horon shook his head in disgust. What moments the Cretans have are always numbered, but they are blind to this. They spend their lives enslaved in unrewarding labor, or even worse, bound by the bloodshed of war. You miss so much, countered Balak. She cast her hand in a grand sweep across the feasting masses. Look around. There is such joy and merriment. The Nexus and Lithuania have become beacons of hope for learned minds. There's art and culture. There is sincere beauty in this world that must not be ignored, You say... She trailed off, realizing that they were not alone. A wide-eyed child stood beside them. She tugged upon her sleeve. "And what can I do for you, my dear?" asked Balak in as kind a voice as she could manage. The small girl looked up at her for a moment, scanning her face closely. "My friend said you're a dragon. You don't look like one." Balak chuckled quietly to herself upon realizing there were a collection of several children hiding behind a stump not a dozen paces away. "Now have you ever seen a dragon before?" asked Balak. "No," said the girl. "Well, then how can you say I don't look like one?" She stood there a moment, contemplating the question. "Can you breathe fire?" "Most assuredly." "And him?" She pointed towards Horon. "He has nothing but hot air," said Balak with a toothy grin. The small child looked confused, but suddenly her eyes widened and a smile stretched across her face. "Will you dance with me, Madam Dragon?" Balak looked over to Horon, who was already flinching. He shook his head no. "I'm sorry, my dear, but I'm quite old and lame in one leg," replied Balak. She flopped her left leg comically as if to prove the point. "But I do believe my companion here would be more than happy to accommodate your request. Would you not, Horon?" "I would on any other occasion," started Horon, lying through his teeth. "But we have adult matters to tend to. You must understand." "Hardly," called out Balak. She patted Horon's back playfully. "Dance with the young lass. There will be time later to discuss the matter further." Without another word, the little girl latched hold of Horon's arm and pulled him towards the dancing circle. The children that were hiding behind the tree came flooding out, jumping and dancing around Horon. He stood frozen stiff, as if he had forgotten how to move his Cretan limbs. Horon shot Balak an angry glance, only to be greeted by her grinning face. Balak called after him, "Spend time with the Cretans, learn their ways. You will quickly realize that there are wonders to behold beyond those that come from their ovens." After several failed attempts and many songs later, Horon returned. His face was knotted in his best facsimile of a scowl. "They're not all that bad, are they?" asked Balak. Horon was about to retort, but discovered that Rancor was drawing near, dressed in his full panoply of steel. The High Lord seemed frustrated, and he was loudly scolding the captain of his guard. "Am I not High Lord of this land? I will not walk in fear under the boughs of my own trees while my lordship yet remains." The reek of wine sat heavy on his breath. "You're in no shape to go traipsing about the woods, High Lord," said Captain Nearso. Then he added sheepishly, "And in all truth, I'm in no shape to provide you with proper protection." Rancor scowled. "Then find me a man who can control his drink." He dismissed the captain with a wave of his hand and turned to the dragons. "We have a problem," began Rancor. "One of the children never returned from a game in the forest. They're sending out a search party now, and I offered up my services. I will be partying for the evening." "That is quite all right," said Horon. "We intend to see you safely to Lithuania," said Balak, rising to her feet. "I have a rather strong nose. Surely we could be of some help finding the child." "I could not ask anything else of you two," said Rancor. "We understand your duties," said Horon. He began to bow in a gesture of parting. Balak corrected Horon's disposition with a sidelong glance. Horon stiffened and nodded in forced agreement. "But it would be nothing at all for us to accompany you." Horon's false enthusiasm showed plainly through his Cretan face. "I say we head off at once." The dim glow of the failing moon was cut to ribbons by the canopy of trees, allowing only slivers of light to reach them on the forest floor. For Balak, the way was as clear as day, but she had to pause and remind herself that it was not so for her Cretan companions. The ground was thick with downed branches and tangled vines, and every dozen paces or so someone would stumble. Progress was slow. Rancor's guards were fanned out on either side of the trio, keeping their distance so that the three lords could speak with some privacy. Rancor prattled on about statecraft and the uneasy alliance he had managed to forge with King Johann during his short tenure as High Lord. Horon walked in silence, periodically taking in great wafts of air. Balak smelled it too. Scent contrails flowed through the forest on rivers of air. Something sat on the tip of her nose that unnerved her, a scent so old she had almost forgotten its taste. She pressed onward, keeping her concerns to herself, but with each passing step the fire in her stomach burned with greater intensity. The missing child's name was Jewel. They called out her name from time to time, halting to listen carefully for any response. There was none, only the oddly desolate quiet of the forest. They had heard neither the chirp of crickets nor the call of night birds. The stillness of the forest only added to Balak's unease. A sharp breeze from the north caused Horon to stop in his track. "Be quiet, and listen. Smell." He jerked his head upward and sniffed the air. "What is it?" asked Rancor. His hand was perched tentatively upon the hilt of his sword. Horon made no response. Instead he leapt to the nearest tree and began to rapidly ascend as if he were a wildcat. His hands and feet suddenly sprouted claws. The tree rustled and shook as he disappeared into the tangle of branches. "The scent is strong up here." 2 luminescent orbs peered down from the darkness. "Creatures of the Wyserum. There are dragoons about." A surge of adrenaline shot through Balak's body. "Are you sure?" said Rancor, his voice suddenly hushed. "Dark children south of the wall? How can this be?" "It shouldn't," said Horon. He dropped down from the tree, landing in a squat. "I'll scout ahead and make sure they're not an immediate threat." Rancor motioned for his men to halt as Horon sprinted off in the direction of the scent. Rancor settled upon a downed tree and unsheathed his sword, testing its edge. "My father spoke often of this enemy, but I never imagined I would meet one." "Let's try to keep it that way," said Balak. "We'll loop around to the east and try our best to avoid them for now. After the girl is found, Horon and I will return. Dragoons have no right to be south of the wall." She shook her head as she paced. "These dragoons may have an association with the carrions, but I can hardly say how. Dragoons are incapable of higher magic. They would never be able to cast a spell of necromancy. Either way, we'll have to find out why they are here. Those monsters were expelled to the Northlands for good reason. My kin will have little tolerance for them venturing into Laveria." Horon returned as silently as he left, appearing at Balak's side. "The dragons have a campsite half a league to the north. I spotted 6 near a campfire, but I wouldn't be surprised if there were more lurking within the shadows." "At least they'll be stationary for the night," said Balak. "The fire will make it easy to track them down later this evening." Horon shook his head. "Not an option. I spotted the girl with them." "They kidnapped one of my people?" hissed Rancor. He immediately turned to one of his men and ordered them to alert General Bailrich and round up the soldiers, garrisoned at Palmyra. "The additional soldiers will come soon enough, but I will not wait. I will lead my guard to deal with this matter immediately." "No," said Balak. "Dragoons are cunning. They will consider reason. We might be able to approach them now, few in number, and achieve a favorable outcome. But if you corner them, they will become as wild as beasts. I cannot guarantee anyone's safety then. You and your guard may come if you must, but please stay hidden. Horde and I will deal with this. They may give up the child peacefully." "If they so much as lift their hand to a blade, I will not stay my sword," insisted Rancor. "When the girl is safe, my archers will put them down." Balak consented to Rancor's final condition. It was deceitful and treacherous, but so were the dragoons. It was better they die quickly. Horon led them through the forest, and within a few minutes they neared the dragoon camp. Rancor and his guards slid with stealth amongst the trees, while Balak and Horon pushed their way into the clearing. They made plenty of noise as they went. They had no intention of sneaking up on the dragoons. "Hail!" called Horon in a friendly voice. He held forth his hands with his palm facing outward to show he came for peaceful means. Immediately the dragoon camp came to life. All rose to their feet, and a few reached for blades. There was a murmur of many voices speaking in a foreign tongue. Finally one of the dragoons moved to meet them, walking with a long loping gait. Illuminated by the light of the moon, the figure's reptilian head came into view. His hands and feet were clawed. A pair of wing-like appendages sprouted from his back, but instead of being covered by membranes or feathers, the forceps were bare, save for a massive bony blade adorning the tip of each. He wore a black leather doublet and matching leggings. His exposed flesh was stippled with white dots that seemed to be in tracery of foreign runes. Balak did not recognize the lettering. A myriad of colorful ribbons hung from his thighs, biceps, and wing blades. They accentuated his muscular frame, granting him a formidable appearance. His slit pupils flared like black pools as they honed upon Horon and Balak. "I greet you as a friend," said the dragoon. He too held out his palms. "I am Tyronius, and these dragoons mean your people no harm." His accent was strong, but with effort they made out his words. "I imagine you're here in search of the young child." He nodded, directing their gaze to a small bundle lying beside the campfire. "Is that our elven child?" asked Balak. Tyronius nodded. "We found her in quite a fright. Cold and lost. She feared us only slightly less than the night. But take heart. We have comforted her, and now she sleeps. We heard the festivities off in the distance, but thought it would be foolish to bring her back in the dark. Your people are not welcoming to my kind. Any that cares so kindly for our children is a friend of ours, said Balak, placing her hand over her heart. We are in gratitude. It's the least we could do, said Tyronius. His face contorted into what could best be described as a smile. I'm truly shocked you approached us at all. He looked to the forest, giving Balak the intense impression that he knew of the elves lying in wait. It was more out of necessity than desire, said Horon, doing nothing to hide his hostility. Balak shot her companion an annoyed glance. I understand your point, said Tyronius, responding as if he took no offense. He gestured for them to follow and made for the child. Balak knelt down and gently picked up the girl. Jewel groggily looked up at her, blinking a few times, and then drifted back to sleep. The child was much too placid. Balak had to wonder what the dragoons had given her to drive her into so sedated a state. She kept the question to herself. How can we repay you? Asked Balak. I have some silver caps if you would like. She reached into a pouch and produced a few coins. It was all an illusion, of course, a construct of her magic, but she was certain the lie would suffice until they got away. Coin? Ha! Laughed the dragoon. No Crete will trade with me for coin. My friend, you have paid me dearly enough by coming here yourself. I could ask for nothing more. The dragoon held out his hand in a gesture of farewell. It was then that Balak realized the other dragoons had risen from the fire. They were beginning to fan out in an encompassing arc, hemming them in. Balak and Tyronius stood there a moment longer, their eyes set sternly upon the other. Each searched for a weakness, but in that instant Balak saw something else entirely within those baleful orbs. A torrent in the darkness, smoldering like lightning on the horizon, but growing ever closer. Without provocation, Tyronius lashed out with his wing blades, slicing across Balak's side. But Balak was quick to act, and she struck the dragoon firmly in his jaw. He crumbled to the ground in a momentary daze. Balak yelled to Horon, Go! Horon needed no second bidding. In the blink of an eye, he transformed to his true form. Scales bristled, wings plumed. His voice tolled like the ringing of a bell as he belted out a magical chant. A hail of energy split the air, reducing a nearby dragoon to blistered flesh and white exposed bone. A second dragoon rushed Horon with his sword drawn. Horon didn't bother to avoid the tiny blade. Instead, he snatched the dragoon in his claws and crushed the beast into the ground with his palm, grinding its screeching skull into the earth. Dozens of dragoons poured out of the surrounding forest, charging on their location with wing blades poised for the kill. Taking this as their cue, the Lithuanian guard broke from their cover. Their bows twanged, and all about the field dragoons fell dead. Rancor arrived to Balak and collected the child from her grasp. His face was palsied in terror. He began to draw a sword with fingers that did not seem to know how to grasp the haft. Balak halted his hand. Protect the girl, and stay behind me, she ordered. With that said, she transformed, her massive frame towering over the downed dragoon. You wretches have no right to be in this land, hissed Balak, through the serrated teeth of her maw. On the contrary, roared Tyronius, as he leapt back to his feet and approached Balak with startling confidence. It is my birthright. The Jethai Mott has long awaited this revenge. Tyronius charged, hacking his wing blades into Balak's hide like a mantis striking its prey. His bony blades punctured through scales as thick as iron plate. The dragoon was shockingly fast, and every snap of a jaw and slash of a claw was met head-on by one of the dragoon's flailing limbs. After only a few attempts to swat the dragoon, she was bleeding heavily from a number of wounds. We need to go, roared Balak as she looked away from the dragoon for an instant, taking in the ghastly scene about her. Already much of Rancor's guard lay dead on the ground, overrun by the surging enemy. She glanced back to where Tyronius last stood, but the dragoon had vanished. She had made a fatal error. Tyronius suddenly popped into view behind her, slashing across her right wing. A searing pain rippled through her body as thick muscles were cleaved in two. Her wing fell uselessly at her side. She stared at it in bewilderment, willing it to rise, but nothing happened. As if from thin air, Tyronius materialized beside her face. There was a sudden prick to her slender neck. Grinning, Tyronius sidestepped out of reach. The sensation of suffocating knotted Balak's throat. She retched. The black pool that formed at her feet confirmed her fear. She was gagging on her own blood. She tasted iron and fire. She tasted death. In the distance she heard a child scream. Horon's voice bellowed like a banshee. The earth shuddered as if the world was breaking. Everything dimmed to a finite point, and only a single glowing figure was left before her. Tyrones placed a reassuring hand upon her quivering snout, and there he remained, contently staring into her eyes as she choked to death on her own blood. There was such certainty within that hate-filled face, Bela could not help but allow the last modicum of hope to slip from her mind. Lightning cracked overhead. The storm had arrived. She was lost, and the world closed about her. The last thing she ever saw were those two dim orbs, wreathed in a torrent of flame.